Movies have always been one of the best chosen for entertainment. With many genres out there, you are sure to find one that you like. However, would you ever choose a silent film? More than likely not, as when you hear the word silent film, you probably think of a black and white 1940s style 4x3 film. But no, that's not what we're talking about today. You probably wouldn't consider WALL-E to be a silent film, did you? In fact, it is qualified to fit in the silent film category. Now before we get into how this film was created with almost no dialogue and still be an incredible story, I'd very much appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button and be one of the first to join this little community we're growing here. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get into this. First, I wanted to mention that this film took 15 years to create and accumulated 96,000 storyboards. Considering the average amount of storyboards is calculated as between 10 to 20 storyboards per minute, so for a standard 90-minute film, that would be between 900 to 9,000. That's 6 times the average amount. With this movie having a runtime of 97 minutes, that's an average of over 900 storyboards per minute. And considering there was 15 years in the making in this film, that's a lot of trial and error. The history of silent films comes from the late 1800s to early 1900s, because the technology of creating a film or short film or special effects of sound was not even created yet. However, this did not matter, as films in general were popular because it was the next step up to entertainment next to theater plays. What depicts a silent film is the least amount of dialogue and sound within the film. WALL-E does have some sound to make it more seem realistic, however 95% of the film is no dialogue. The way they pulled this off was the rule, show, don't tell. I personally have been studying storytelling for the past 8 years, and what this depiction means is when writing a story, instead of writing, Michael was terribly afraid of the dark. Instead, you would write, as his mother switched off the light and left the room, Michael tensed. He huddled under the covers, gripped the sheets, and held his breath as the wind brushed past the curtain. This is the golden rule of storytelling, and honestly is still taking me some time to fully understand. It's not as easy as you might think in particular scenes. Showing also helps develop characters in a way that isn't just listing their traits. For instance, NBC's hit show This Is Us is a great example of this. Spanning 6 seasons and 88 episodes later, the reason the show is so successful is because of the show don't tell rule. The writers of these episodes understand how to portray that it's like the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This show is notorious for creating scenes that are enticing because of the focus they have on the story and the way they direct visuals into stories instead of relying on words.
Amethyst and flowers on the table. Is it real or a fake? And we all know how this will end. What is that song you sing for the dead? I see the signals.
In the pilot episode of the show, during the first scene, we get introduced to a few of the characters during the first 4 pages of the script, and after the fact there is a lot of time where it is only action lines. In these types of scenarios, it is incredibly important for the show don't tell rule, as you must make sure the audience is not only able to understand the story, but follow it as you move forward and not use any unnecessary scenes or moments. Anyway, this is what they did throughout the entire movie, having to tell a story using only scene description and sound to portray a movie. Ben Burt, a sound designer on the project, said, when you use sounds gathered in the outside world, the real world, and you bring them into a science fiction film, you get the credibility of those sounds to sell the audience the reality of what's really just a very fantastic world.
When you use sounds gathered in the outside world, the real world, and you bring them into a science fiction film, you get the credibility of those sounds to sell to the audience the reality of what's really just a very fantastic world. I heard a sound in an old war movie on TV. There was a private cranking a generator to provide power for an army radio in the field.
He wanted to have a similarity to R2-D2 since he had worked on sound design for Star Wars. The sound of the wind on Earth is composed of recordings of Niagara Falls, where 3,160 tons of water flows over the edge every second. The wind sounds heard inside WALL-E's trailer during the toxic waste storm were created by recording the sound of a canvas bag being dragged across the carpeted floor. WALL-E has various speeds and a multitude of motors, and Burt deliberately picked out different sounds for these movements. The slowest speed for WALL-E when he has to be quiet, is an old army hand-cranked generator used to power a field radio. Bert heard the generator while watching the John Wayne film Island in the Sky on TV and thought it made a distinct noise. He purchased one and attached it to a workbench to crank out the noise for a recording. Wally's fastest speed is principally made by an inertia starter from an antique bip line, which was used to start the engine. Though when Wally gets going, additional sounds get added. Again, Ben heard the noise and purchased a starter from a 1939 plane. Wally's compacting noise is the recording of a car being crushed at a dump. Wally's voice was actually created by running Ben Burt's voice through a computer with the aid of a custom modified computer created by Bert and software from the synthesizer program called Kemia. Ben's voice is analyzed and broken up into its component parts, changing its volume and pitch. Because of this, Ben is able to make Wally's voice do things a human never could.
From the background sounds, the ambiances, the wind, the storms, the hum inside a spaceship, as well as the mechanical sounds of motors and robot arms and legs and treads.
The big thing that's unique about sound design and animation is the fact that you get nothing for free. You don't get on a set and hear the way the environment sounds naturally, or the way somebody walks across a room, or just their voice.
Wally.
It was a little funny at first for me when Andrew would start evaluating sounds that I was making. He would show up and 5 or 6 a group would show up, and they'd all sit around, and I'd play one little sound of a door closing, click, and everybody would think about it, and there'd be a discussion.
If it was a softer zipline kind of thing, maybe we could get away with keeping it in there.
Creating these sounds for the film was crucial, as a normal film where there's tons of dialogue, the words from the actor tell the story. With Wally, the sounds alone have to tell the story. Since the movie isn't technically 100% dialogue free, I wanted to look at the scenes where there was talking between characters and see if there was a way, if there was no dialogue, if the audience would still understand the story based on what the characters were doing. Consider the scene taking place in the captain's quarters. Keep in the theme of the movie, how could they have changed the scene to stick with the no dialogue theme? Doing away with dialogue, when the captain wakes up, he is the only character that speaks for the audience. Unlike when we see the beginning portion of the ship where we see the board members talking, but to screens. Instead of conversation with Otto, it could have been an automated message or something put on their screens to read, as the board members seem too occupied to even hear what the captain is saying.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 255,642 aboard the Axiom. As always, weather's a balmy 72 degrees and sunny, and oh, hey, I see the ship's log is showing that today is our 700th anniversary of our 5-year cruise. Well, I'm sure our forefathers would be proud to know that 700 years later we'd be...
As Eve and Wally come up to join the captain in his headquarters, Eve and Wally are able to communicate to each other just by showing things, like the plant or the light bulb, by saying their name a certain way. The captain can do this the same way. In fact, he doesn't have to speak at all. If you look at this scene with no sound, you can tell what's going on from how far in the story we are, so we would understand what is happening if they didn't include dialogue here. Another thing I wanted to point out is one of the reasons Wally doesn't speak is because he struggles to get his own name out.
Ooh. Directive. Classified. Name. Wally.
We know that Wally is older than Eve, obviously, as Eve has a more sleek design and Wally is last of his kind, and honestly would take about another 100 to 200 years to actually clean up the entire planet alone at the rate that he does it. Regardless, the Axiom has now taken over and doesn't want humans to return, but that doesn't matter as much as there is nothing to return to, and with them actually returning to Earth, it would take an extraordinary amount of time to get businesses up and running and getting people back in shape in order to get to planting and everything else. There would be an entirely new generation of people before everything would return to normal. Another factor is the way we understand the movie. Not only was this movie challenging because of no dialogue, but using robotics as the main characters. With no dialogue and no facial expressions, the creators had to find a way to portray emotion. At the 2-minute mark, WALL-E is gathering obscure items and Pixar is giving a clever hint about how different WALL-E is from other robots. An AI with the needs of a human. He also follows a pattern like humans would, getting up every day, quote, going to work, then coming home and having a relaxing day watching television. This is another way that the writers were able to provide detail that you may not even think about. Something that's familiar to us, something that's relatable. The one thing that WALL-E understood above all Pixar animations to this day was the power of accessibility. A language can come with barriers. Text can be unreadable. A choice of dialect can be alienating, but a head tilt, a gaze, or expression of love is universal.